In 2019, a remotely operated vehicle descended into the Norwegian Sea and returned with footage of a wreck that had been sitting on the bottom for 30 years. The images were expected. The vehicle had cameras, lights, mechanical arms, standard equipment for a deep-sea survey. What it brought back that changed everything was not on the video feed. It was in the water samples. The data that came up from that dive did not confirm what decades of monitoring had promised. It contradicted it. And the contradiction was so large, so far outside the expected range, that the scientists who processed it had to run the numbers again. They came back the same. But before that number reaches you, you need to understand what is down there. Because the wreck itself is not ordinary, and what it carries is not ordinary. And the reason it matters, the reason a single water sample from a single dive site in the Norwegian Sea forced an international conversation that had been closed for a quarter century, only makes sense if you understand how deep this goes. In every sense of the word. The submarine, on the bottom, is K-278 Komsomolets. It is the deepest nuclear submarine wreck on Earth. It rests at 1,680 meters, roughly 5,500 feet, in the Norwegian Sea, approximately 180 kilometers southwest of Bear Island, in the waters between mainland Norway and the Svalbard archipelago. That depth alone makes it extraordinary. Most submarine wrecks sit on continental shelves, in waters shallow enough to reach, shallow enough to seal, shallow enough to manage. K-278 does not. It sits in a column of black, near freezing water, more than a mile deep, in a region where the currents move slowly, and the pressure is immense. It has a nuclear reactor inside it. And it is leaking. That fact, confirmed, measured, quantified, opens the first question that pulls everything else downward. If this submarine was the most advanced vessel the Soviet Union ever built, if its hull was designed to survive forces that would crush anything else at that depth, how did it end up on the bottom of the Norwegian Sea in the first place? K-278 was not a standard submarine. It was a technological declaration. Its hull was built from a titanium alloy designated 48T, a material so light, so strong, so resistant to the crushing pressures of deep ocean that no other navy on Earth was using it for full submarine construction. That alloy gave K-278 something no other attack submarine had. Depth. Its operating range stretched between 1,020 and 3,370 feet beneath the surface. At those depths, it was functionally unreachable. Conventional torpedoes could not track it. Enemy submarines could not follow it. Its reactor, the OK-650B3, produced 190 megawatts of thermal power, enough to drive it through the deep ocean at speeds most surface vessels couldn't match. The Soviet Navy did not just build K-278. They built the argument that depth itself could be a weapon. They called it invincible. And that word matters. Because invincible things are not supposed to burn. April 7th, 1989. Somewhere in compartment 7, the aftmost section of the submarine, a short circuit ignited a fire. Within moments, the blaze found the high-pressure air system, the HPA line, which feeds compressed oxygen throughout the boat. A rupture in that line turned a contained electrical fire into something uncontrollable. Oxygen-fed flames tore through the aft compartments at a depth between 335 and 386 meters beneath the surface. The crew fought it. They sealed bulkheads, activated suppression systems, and brought K-278 to the surface between 11:13 and 11:16 in the morning. For nearly 6 hours, the most advanced submarine ever built sat on the surface of the Norwegian Sea, burning from the inside, while its crew tried to save it. They could not. Between 1508 and 1700 hours, K-278 lost its fight. The hull flooded, the stern dipped, and the submarine that was never supposed to be vulnerable sank straight down to 1,680 meters, the exact depth it was once designed to master. It took most of its crew with it. 69 men were aboard K-278 that morning. 42 of them died. And the way they died is a layer of this story that has never stopped pressing down on the ones that follow. 4 men were killed by the fire itself, trapped in the aft compartments when the blaze became unsurvivable. The remaining 38 did not die inside the submarine. They made it out. They reached the surface. They were in the water, alive, in the Norwegian Sea, in April, where the water temperature hovers just above freezing. And they waited. Rescue did not come in time. 38 sailors died of hypothermia, floating in open ocean, surviving the sinking only to be killed by the cold. Captain Evgeny Vanin died in the Visk escape capsule, the submarine's last resort ejection pod, when a hydrogen explosion sealed it at or near crush depth. He never surfaced. If you are still watching this, take a moment with that. 69 men went down in a machine their country called Invincible. 42 came back in body bags, or not at all. The submarine sank. The crew died. The wreck settled at the bottom of the Norwegian Sea. And for 30 years, the world was told one version of what that wreck meant. So why, 3 decades later, was a research team finding something in the water above it that was never supposed to be there? After K-278 sank, the wreck was declared stable. Official monitoring began in 1993, and over the next 25 years the public position never wavered. The reactor was contained, the site was being watched, there was no significant environmental threat. The depth was cited as a natural seal, cold, pressure, and distance, doing what human engineering could not. The titanium hull was cited as a physical barrier, too strong, too corrosion-resistant to fail in any meaningful time frame. And for a long time, that story held. No one challenged it publicly with data large enough to force a revision. Until 2019. The Røvger 6000, deployed from the research vessel Akademik Mstislav Keldysh and operated under the direction of Hilde-Lise Heldal from Norway's Institute of Marine Research, descended to the wreck and took water samples from the plume directly above the hull. What those samples contained did not match 25 years of official assurance. They did not come close. The cesium-137 concentration in the water column above K-278 came back between 800,000 and 1 million times higher than normal background levels in seawater. Let that land. Not 2 times higher. Not 10 times. Not 100. Between 800,000 and 1 million times the expected concentration, a figure so far beyond the boundary of contained that the word itself loses meaning. Cesium-137 is a fission product. It does not occur naturally in seawater at any measurable concentration. Its presence at those levels means one thing with absolute certainty: radioactive material is leaving the wreck. Actively. Measurably. Now. And that fact, confirmed, published, unambiguous, tears open the question that everything before it has been building toward. If the hull is titanium, if the depth is a mile, if the wreck has been declared stable and monitored for decades, how is radiation escaping that submarine at a concentration nearly 1 million times above normal? What is breaching? What is failing? And what exactly is it coming from? That question had an answer, and the answer was worse than the radiation. The titanium hull, the very thing that made K-278 the deepest diving submarine ever built, is now the mechanism of its contamination. Titanium does not corrode easily in salt water. That is true. But K-278 was not built from titanium alone. Its internal structure, its fittings, its torpedo tubes, its weapons casings, these were steel. And when titanium sits in prolonged contact with steel in a saltwater environment, something happens that the engineers who designed K-278 understood in theory, but buried in practice. A galvanic reaction. The titanium becomes the electrochemically dominant metal. It does not degrade. Instead, it accelerates the corrosion of every steel component it touches. The technical description that has emerged from the evidence record is precise. The titanium hull is acting as a galvanic battery. The stronger the titanium remains, the faster it eats what surrounds it. The hull that was supposed to protect the contents of K-278 for centuries is instead dismantling them from the inside. That is the answer to how the radiation is escaping. The hull is not failing. The hull is succeeding, and in succeeding, it is destroying the only barriers between the ocean and what the submarine was carrying, which forces the next question downward. What exactly was it carrying? K-278 went down with 2 torpedoes tipped with plutonium warheads, not uranium. Plutonium, Pu-239, approximately 28 pounds in each warhead, 56 pounds total, sitting at the bottom of the Norwegian Sea inside steel casings that are being actively consumed by the hull around them. Plutonium-239 is not like cesium. Cesium dissolves into water. It disperses. It can be measured in parts per billion and modeled across current systems. Plutonium does not behave that way. A single speck of Pu-239, a particle too small to see, is enough to be lethal if inhaled or ingested. It does not need to dissolve into the ocean to be catastrophic. It needs to reach the food chain. It needs to reach sediment. It needs to reach anything biological. And the only thing preventing that, the only physical barrier between 56 pounds of weapons-grade plutonium and the Norwegian Sea, is a set of steel torpedo casings that are corroding faster every year, because the titanium around them is electrochemically forcing them to. The cesium-137 in the water column is not the crisis. It is the signal. It is proof that the barriers are failing. And if they are failing for cesium, they are failing for plutonium. The next question is no longer about K278's internal chemistry. It is about what was done and not done to stop this. The answer to that question has a name. Project Jellyfish. At some point after the corrosion risk became internally acknowledged, containment caps were placed over identified leak points on the wreck. The intention was mechanical: seal the breaches, slow the release, buy time. The caps failed. The seals deteriorated. And the public record, the one that continued to describe the wreck as stable, monitored, and posing no significant environmental threat, did not update to reflect that failure. The internal record told a different story. Seals breaking down, leak rates persisting, galvanic corrosion continuing unchecked at a pace that made the original containment timeline obsolete. The gap between what the public was told and what the monitoring data actually showed is not ambiguous. It is documented, and it means that for every year the official position held, no significant threat, being monitored, situation stable, the steel casings around those plutonium warheads were thinning. The galvanic battery was running, and the clock on full exposure was getting shorter. That alone would be enough to justify the phrase some researchers have used to describe K278, an underwater Chernobyl. But here is where the scale breaks open, one final time. Because K278 is not alone down there. It is not even close to alone. The Barents and Kara Seas, the same Arctic waters where K278 rests, contain 19 ships, 17,000 containers of radioactive waste, and 16 nuclear reactors. All deliberately dumped. Not lost. Not sunk by accident. Dumped by the Soviet Union as a deliberate strategy of nuclear disposal by depth. The logic was the same logic that was applied to K278 after it sank. The ocean is deep, the water is cold, the pressure is immense, and what goes down stays down. That logic has now been disproven by the cesium-137 plume above K278, radiation levels up to 1,000,000 times normal. Escaping a wreck that was supposed to be sealed by the very forces the disposal strategy relied on. And K278 is one wreck, one submarine, one data point in a field of 19 ships and 16 reactors and 17,000 containers, all sitting in the same salt water, all subject to the same galvanic chemistry, all decaying on the same timeline. K159, another nuclear submarine, sank in the Barents Sea in 2003, more than a decade after the Cold War ended. The pattern did not stop. The dumping may have slowed, but the decay did not. And the same ocean that is pulling cesium and plutonium out of K278 is working on every steel casing, every containment vessel, every corroding reactor housing in that graveyard. K278 is not an isolated emergency. It is the first wreck to produce numbers large enough to prove what is happening to all of them, and there are questions the evidence still has not answered. Whether the fire that killed K278 on April 7, 1989, was purely accidental, a short circuit and nothing more, or whether sabotage played a role has never been resolved. The investigation closed without a definitive conclusion on that point. There were reports, never fully substantiated, of an unusual cargo aboard the submarine, sometimes described in fringe analysis as red mercury, a material whose existence remains scientifically disputed. These are not confirmed facts. They are open entries in a record that was never completed. But the most uncomfortable open question is not about espionage or mystery cargo. It is about engineering. The galvanic corrosion that is now dismantling the torpedo casings, the reaction between titanium and steel in salt water, was, according to post-Cold War naval analysis, a foreseeable consequence of the design. Not a surprise. Not an unknown. Foreseeable, which means the possibility that this failure was anticipated and accepted, that the men who designed K-278 knew what salt water would eventually do to its steel components inside a titanium shell, and built it anyway, is not a conspiracy theory. It is an open question in the engineering record, and it has never been answered. So now you have seen every layer. The discovery, the wreck, the fire, the crew, the official record, the radiation, the titanium paradox, the plutonium, the failed containment, the graveyard, the unanswered questions that no government has closed. If you have made it this far, you understand something that most people never will. The full depth of what is sitting at the bottom of the Arctic and what the data says is happening to it right now. So here's the question that matters more than any question this script has asked, knowing all of this. Knowing that 19 ships and 16 reactors and 17,000 containers of radioactive waste are decaying in the same water, under the same chemistry, on the same clock. What do you think should be done about it? Drop your answer in the comments. Because the people with the authority to act have not answered it yet. The 2019 expedition found radiation levels up to 1 million times higher than normal seawater above a single submarine. That submarine is one wreck in a graveyard of dozens. The titanium is intact. The steel is not. The plutonium is still there. The containment has failed. The ocean does not forget what is buried in it. It disassembles the burial, piece by piece, year by year, and returns what was hidden to the water column, to the current, to the food chain, to the surface. And what is sitting at the bottom of the Barents and Kara Seas is not a Cold War relic being managed. It is a slow-motion nuclear event with no cleanup plan, no international framework, no timeline for action, and no endpoint. Because the chemistry that is driving it does not stop. The decay that is feeding it does not pause. And the ocean that is carrying it upward does not care what any government promised was safe.